There is a quiet problem in the prepping world that nobody wants to address. You can have a closet stacked with rice. You can have 50 pounds of pinto beans sealed up tight in Mylar bags. You can have enough wheat berries to outlast a medieval siege, and you can still be in serious trouble. Not because you will starve, the calories are there. The math checks out. But because after about 10 days of eating the same flavorless, monotonous meals 3 times a day, something starts to break inside you. Not physically, but mentally. There is a name for it. It is called appetite fatigue, and it has been documented in disaster after disaster. From hurricane survivors who stopped eating their MREs to soldiers in the field who lost dangerous amounts of weight despite having access to perfectly adequate rations. What happens is, your body starts rejecting food it finds psychologically unacceptable even when you are hungry, even when you are losing weight, and even when you know rationally that you absolutely need to eat. And the thing about appetite fatigue is that it hits kids first, then the elderly, then eventually everyone else. It is not weakness. It is your brain doing something deeply stubbornly human, refusing to cooperate with a situation it finds unbearable. There is an account from a family during Hurricane Rita who had plenty of MRE rations in their storm cellar. They had enough food to last weeks. However, the children stopped eating after 3 days, not because the food was spoiled or unsafe, but because it was the same food at every single meal with no variation, and their minds simply shut down around it. The adults in the group ended up hunting rabbits and foraging damaged vegetables from a garden, not because they were out of food, but because they needed something different to keep the kids eating at all. This is not a minor inconvenience. It is a serious problem with real consequences. The Minnesota starvation experiment in the 1940s demonstrated that even controlled, calorie-sufficient diets caused severe psychological disturbances when the food was bland and repetitive, leading to depression, obsessive thinking about food, intense irritability, and social withdrawal. Participants who had been psychologically healthy before the study began, showing symptoms that resembled clinical mental illness, and the researchers linked it directly to the monotony and inadequacy of their meals. The relationship between food variety and mental stability is not just a preference or a complaint from people being picky. It is documented science, and it applies directly to every one of us building a food storage plan based primarily on bulk staples. So, while most prepping content focuses on calories and macros and shelf life charts and how many months your rice will last, there is a second layer to food storage that experienced preppers understand but rarely talk about openly. It is the layer that keeps you actually eating, that keeps morale intact, and that turns survival rations into something your family will sit down and consume willingly, not just today, but on day 30, day 60, or day 90. That is what we are covering today. 11 dehydrated foods that serve as the connective tissue between raw survival and functional living. Some of these items have been mentioned before in passing in other contexts as parts of other lists. I want to be transparent about that. It is often said that people need to be reminded more than they need to be taught. That sentiment bears repeating here because these are not exactly secrets. They are the items that tend to quietly slip off the list when someone is staring at a budget spreadsheet trying to figure out where to start. They get skipped in favor of another bag of rice, which is critical, but rice alone is a recipe for appetite fatigue. And appetite fatigue in a prolonged crisis is a recipe for real trouble, especially if you have kids or elderly family members depending on you. Let's get into it. Butter powder. If you have never used it, you will probably be skeptical. Butter is one of those ingredients that seems impossible to store long-term because it goes bad so quickly. Leave a stick of butter on the counter for a few warm days, and you can smell the rancidity setting in. In any scenario where you lose refrigeration, which is most of the scenarios we prepare for, your dairy is the first thing that goes. Butter powder changes that problem entirely. It is real butter, typically spray-dried with powdered milk added to create a stable, shelf-safe form. Stored properly in a sealed number 10 can with an oxygen absorber, you are looking at 5 to 10 years of usable shelf life, depending on the brand and how well you manage your storage environment. Cool, dark, and dry is the rule for everything on this list. What butter powder gives you is something that most long-term food storage completely lacks, which is fat. Not just any fat, but familiar, rich, comforting fat. the kind your brain immediately recognizes as real food. Your body needs dietary fat to function, especially under stress. Your brain literally runs on it. And in terms of making bland survival food something you will actually want to eat, there is almost nothing more effective than adding butter to it. Stir a couple of tablespoons of reconstituted butter powder into a plain bowl of rice, and you fundamentally change the experience of that meal. Add it to oatmeal in the morning, toss it with noodles, or drop a spoonful into a pot of beans. It transforms the psychological quality of survival food in a way that few other single ingredients can match. That is the underlying principle to keep in mind. We are not just talking about nutrition, we are talking about the willingness to eat. Tomato powder. This is one of those items that once you start using it in your regular cooking, you wonder why it took so long to find. Most people stockpile canned tomatoes because they are cheap, familiar, and available at any grocery store. That is fine for short-term storage, but canned tomatoes have a real vulnerability when it comes to long-term planning: the acidity. Tomatoes are highly acidic, and over years of storage, that acid slowly interacts with the metal can, degrading the seal and eventually compromising the food inside. They are also heavy and take up a lot of room, which matters significantly if you are working with a pantry closet rather than a basement. Tomato powder is the elegant solution. A single large can of the stuff replaces dozens of heavy grocery store cans. Mix it with a small amount of water and you get thick tomato paste. Add a bit more water and it becomes sauce. Dilute it further and you have got the base for a rich soup or stew. It is one of the most versatile flavor tools you can keep on a shelf because tomato is the backbone of so many meals we already eat without even thinking about it. Chili, spaghetti, stew, soup, shakshuka, or even just a basic pot of rice and beans gets transformed into something with character when you add a tomato base. Versatility is the key word. The more ways you can alter the flavor of your base grains and legumes from one night to the next, the longer your family will keep eating them without pushing back. Tomato powder gives you a whole spectrum of cooking options from a single compact, lightweight container. Whole egg powder. Not egg whites, but whole eggs, yolk and all. That distinction matters much more than you might think. Powdered egg whites are cheap, and you will see them recommended everywhere for food storage. The problem is they taste flat, almost chalky, and they are missing all the fat, flavor, and key nutrients that come from the yolk. The yolk is where you find vitamin D, vitamin A, choline, and the complete amino acid profile that keeps your muscles from breaking down when you are doing hard physical work every day. Whole egg powder costs more because the manufacturing process is more complex. The natural fat content in the yolk makes spray drying trickier, and the end product slightly less stable. But the payoff is significant. You can make something that genuinely resembles scrambled eggs. You can use it in baking when you have flour and other dry goods available. You can whisk it into soups and stews for a protein boost. And all of this comes from something that has been quietly waiting on your shelf for years until you needed it. Familiar food matters enormously when everything else about your situation feels unstable and foreign. Eggs in the morning seems like a small thing right now. But when the big things are falling apart around you, small things carry a lot of weight. Real cheese powder. I want to stress that word real. There is a meaningful, noticeable difference between the artificial cheese dust that comes in a box of cheap macaroni and actual dehydrated cheddar made from real cheese. Real cheese powder contains animal fats, calcium, protein, and a depth of flavor that does something almost magical to otherwise boring food. It does not just make it tolerable, it makes it something you might genuinely look forward to sitting down and eating. If there is a single item on this list that I would call a morale weapon, it is cheese powder. Sprinkle it on rice and beans. Make a cheese sauce with a bit of water and butter powder and pour it over noodles. Add it to a soup for richness and body. If you have children, this is the item that bridges the enormous gap between a plate they will refuse and a plate they will clean. As we discussed, getting kids to eat consistently during a prolonged crisis may be one of the most difficult and important challenges you face as a parent. You do not need a perfect diet in a crisis. You need an adequate one. And adequacy starts with food your family will actually put in their mouths. Peanut butter powder. Regular jarred peanut butter is already one of the most commonly recommended prepper foods, and its reputation is well earned. It is calorie-dense, protein-rich, familiar, and comforting. But it has a shelf life problem that people tend to underestimate. The natural oils in peanut butter separate over time, and eventually those oils go rancid. Open a jar that has been sitting undisturbed in your pantry for 3 or 4 years, and you might find something that smells wrong and tastes worse. It is not necessarily dangerous, but unpleasant enough that nobody in your household will want to eat it. And there we are again, right back at appetite fatigue. Peanut butter powder eliminates that issue because most of the volatile oil has been pressed out during manufacturing. What remains is a concentrated lightweight powder that, when stored properly in nitrogen-flushed packaging with an oxygen absorber, can last 10 to 15 years. Reconstitute it with water, and you get something close to the real thing. It is not identical to a fresh jar off the shelf, but close enough to spread, to stir into oatmeal, to add to baked goods, or to mix into a warm drink for calories and comfort. There is another dimension to peanut butter powder worth noting. Per dollar and per cubic inch of shelf space, it is one of the most calorie-efficient protein sources you can store. For people living in apartments or small homes where every square foot matters, that density is a real advantage. Heavy cream powder. This one often flies under the radar even among experienced preppers, but it deserves your attention. Heavy cream powder is pure concentrated caloric energy. In any scenario where your physical workload increases significantly, which is virtually every emergency scenario, your calorie needs jump. You are not sitting at a desk. You are hauling water, splitting firewood, securing your property, standing watches, or walking to check on neighbors. Some estimates suggest your daily caloric requirement could nearly double depending on the labor and the ambient temperature. Heavy cream powder lets you add dense, efficient calories to almost anything without changing the meal's character. Stir it into soup to make it richer and thicker. Add it to coffee if you have access to it. Use it in any baking you are doing with your stored flour and eggs. Mix it into a hot drink when the temperature drops at night. That last use is worth dwelling on for a moment. When it gets cold, truly cold, a hot, calorie-dense beverage is not just emotionally comforting, it is actively helping your body maintain core temperature. There is a practical reason why cultures around the world and throughout history have relied on rich, warm drinks during cold months. Heavy cream powder gives you that capability without needing a functioning refrigerator or a fresh supply chain. Sour cream powder. This is the one that raises eyebrows when I bring it up. Nobody thinks of sour cream as a prepping item, but pause for a moment and think about how many meals we eat on a regular basis that rely on that creamy, tangy element. Baked potatoes, tacos, beef stroganoff, a bowl of chili with a generous dollop, enchiladas, or dips. It is a flavor and texture component that makes otherwise simple, one-dimensional dishes feel complete and satisfying. In powdered form, sour cream stores well long-term and comes back to life with just water. It is also a caloric additive, which always matters in a scenario where you are expending more energy than normal. Use it to thicken a watery soup, enrich a plain bowl of rice, or give a one-pot meal some personality and depth. That word personality might sound frivolous in the context of emergency food, but it is absolutely not. It is the difference between a meal that merely sustains your body and a meal that sustains your willingness to keep showing up, to keep functioning, and to keep taking care of things. Preparedness is not about fear. It is about the peace that comes from knowing you have taken care of the basics. And the basics include not just keeping people alive, but maintaining enough normalcy and comfort that they stay mentally engaged and functional. Morale is not a luxury in a prolonged situation. Morale is survival infrastructure. Dehydrated garlic and onion. I am grouping these together because they serve the same essential purpose and because you genuinely need both. If butter powder is the base layer of good survival cooking and tomato powder provides the color, then garlic and onion are the backbone. They are what make food taste like someone actually cooked it, like someone cared. You can get dehydrated minced garlic and dehydrated chopped onion in bulk quantities for surprisingly little money. They store for years in airtight containers and they go into everything. Every soup, every stew, every pot of beans, every grain dish, and every improvised casserole. Without them, even well-stocked food storage ends up tasting bland and institutional, like a hospital cafeteria on its worst day. With garlic and onion in the mix, the same basic ingredients start tasting like dinner, like somebody's kitchen. A practical note from experience. Buy these in the largest quantity you can reasonably store and rotate. You will go through dehydrated garlic and onion faster than you expect, especially if you are cooking every meal from scratch without access to fresh produce. A little goes a long way in a single dish, but when you are cooking 3 meals a day from stored food, those small amounts add up quickly over weeks and months. Powdered whole milk. Not non-fat, but whole milk. Non-fat powdered milk has been a prepping staple for decades, and it works fine as a baking ingredient or a recipe component. But as a drinking milk that you would pour in a glass and hand to your family, it falls short. It tastes thin, watery, and slightly off. Kids notice it immediately, and many will flat out reject it. Adults tolerate it, but do not enjoy it. And that matters because if you are making hot cocoa or oatmeal or any other comfort food from your stores, the quality of the milk you are using directly affects whether that food does its job of providing comfort. If milk tastes wrong, everything made with it tastes wrong. If you are trying to maintain any sense of normalcy in your household, especially for young children, powdered whole milk represents a meaningful upgrade in quality of life. The fat content does mean the shelf life is shorter than non-fat. You are typically looking at 2 to 5 years depending on packaging and storage temperature, compared to potentially much longer for the non-fat version. So, you will want to rotate it more actively. But what you get in return is something that actually resembles milk. Something you can drink, pour over cereal or granola, use in cooking and baking, or give to a child who needs the familiar comfort of a glass of milk before bed. In the context of a prolonged disruption, especially when children are involved, familiar routines and familiar tastes are genuinely stabilizing. They tell a child without words that things are still okay, that the adults around them have it handled. Freeze-dried ground beef. This is the premium item on the list, and I want to be straightforward about that. Quality freeze-dried meat is not cheap. A number 10 can represent a real financial investment. But if your budget allows for it, even a modest amount on your shelf is worth having because meat changes the equation of a meal in ways that few other single foods can match. Meat is deeply wired into how most of us experience satiety and comfort at the table. A bowl of chili without meat is functional. A bowl of chili with actual ground beef is a meal that makes you feel like everything might turn out okay. That sounds like a small distinction when you are reading it from the comfort of your current life. In a crisis, that distinction is enormous. Freeze-dried ground beef rehydrates in warm water in just a few minutes and cooks up remarkably close to fresh meat, compared to jerky, which tends to be loaded with sodium and does not integrate smoothly into recipes. Freeze-dried ground beef is genuinely versatile. Use it in pasta sauce, tacos, casseroles, stews, or chili. It bridges the gap between survival food and actual home cooking in a way that almost nothing else in your pantry can. Pressure canning your own meat is an excellent option if you have developed that skill, but it requires equipment, practice, and absolute technical precision to do safely. For someone who is just beginning to build their first serious pantry, that learning curve is a real barrier. A couple of cans of freeze-dried ground beef sitting on a shelf with a 20-plus year shelf life offer a kind of quiet insurance that is hard to replicate any other way. You do not have to think about it or maintain it. It just sits there ready until the day you need it. Cocoa powder. Pure, unsweetened cocoa powder, not instant hot chocolate mix, which is mostly sugar and artificial flavoring and will not store nearly as well. I saved this item for the end intentionally because it is the one people question the most, and I genuinely believe it might be among the most important items on this list for long-term morale. Chocolate is one of the most psychologically powerful foods human beings have ever encountered. There is a reason it has been included in military rations going back to World War II and in exploration supplies long before that. It provides a sense of comfort, reward, and normalcy that goes beyond any nutritional spreadsheet. A mug of hot cocoa made from cocoa powder, some powdered whole milk, and a bit of sugar or honey is an act of care for your kids after a hard, confusing day, for your spouse when the weight of the situation is pressing down, or for yourself when you need a quiet reminder that small comforts still exist in the world. Cocoa powder is also ridiculously shelf-stable. Stored in an airtight container in a cool, dark place, it can maintain quality for years, well beyond whatever date is stamped on the package. It is cheap to buy, takes up almost no room on a shelf, and its psychological value in a prolonged crisis is genuinely hard to put a number on. Think about what chocolate represents in our culture: celebration, comfort, love, reward. Those associations do not vanish during an emergency. If anything, they become more powerful because everything else that carried those associations has temporarily disappeared. You can also use cocoa powder in baking, stir it into oatmeal for a chocolatey breakfast, or mix it with peanut butter powder and a little sweetener for something that tastes remarkably close to a dessert. In a situation where treats and luxuries have been stripped away, that matters more than you might think. The best prep is the one you actually do. And sometimes doing the prep means acknowledging that human beings are not machines running on fuel. We need food that makes us feel like people. Food that carries memory and comfort and the quiet reassurance that life still has some sweetness in it. Now, there is a pattern across all 11 of these items that is worth stepping back and naming. None of them are the main event. Rice is the main event. Beans are the main event. Wheat, oats, lentils, those are your caloric foundation, and they should be your first priority. What we have been talking about today is the supporting cast, the ensemble players, the ingredients that take a pile of raw survival calories and turn them into meals that a real human being in a real crisis, under real stress, will actually eat willingly, day after day, week after week, without their body and their mind slowly shutting down from the monotony. These items share something else too. They are compact. They are relatively affordable, especially when you are not buying them all at once, and they all work in small spaces. You do not need a basement or a bunker or a 100-acre homestead to store them. You need a shelf and a closet, a few square feet under a bed, or maybe a corner of a pantry that you have reorganized. That is it. If you are working with limited space and a real budget, the strategy is simple and it works. Build your caloric foundation first. Rice, beans, oats. Get those squared away, then start layering in these supporting items one at a time, one per month. Fold it into your normal grocery shopping trip so it doesn't feel like a separate project. A can of butter powder this month, tomato powder next month, a bag of cheese powder the month after that. In 6 months, without spending more than an extra $15 or $20 on any single shopping trip, you will have a pantry that does not just keep you alive. It keeps you eating and eating well enough to stay functional, stay mentally sharp, and take care of the people counting on you. None of these items are exotic. None of them require special skills to use. You do not need to be a gourmet cook or even a particularly good one. If you can boil water and stir a pot, you can use every single item on this list to turn basic stored grains and legumes into something your family will actually sit down and eat. That is the whole point. Not perfection. Not Instagram-worthy meals, just food that sustains people physically and mentally through a difficult stretch of time. I know some of you watching have been at this for a while. You have heard some of these items mentioned in passing before. Good. That means you have been paying attention. But knowing about something and actually doing something about it are two completely different things. And the gap between those two is where most good intentions go to die. Maybe today is the day you finally add tomato powder to your next grocery order. Maybe you grab a can of butter powder or a bag of cocoa powder. Just one item. That is all it takes to start closing the gap between food you have stored and food you will actually eat. Preparedness does not require perfection. It requires movement. Small, steady, consistent movement in the direction of being a little more ready than you were yesterday. That is all it has ever been. If this information changed the way you think about your survival pantry, please subscribe and like the video. We are digging deep into the strategies for resilience that others often ignore. Plant the seeds for your future security. The next essential guide will be revealed soon.